In this episode, we are moving into one of the most practical parts of risk work, because once an organization begins to identify risk, the next question is not simply whether a threat exists, but what that threat could actually do to the business. Identifying potential or realized impacts of information technology, IT. Risk means understanding the consequences that could happen if a risk event occurs, as well as the consequences that have already happened when an incident, failure, or breakdown has taken place. For a brand new learner, this is where risk starts to feel real, because impact is what connects technical problems to business harm. A weak control, a vulnerable system, or a failed process matters only because it can affect operations, money, customers, legal obligations, data quality, trust, or safety. Once you understand impact clearly, you stop looking at risk as a technical abstraction and start seeing it as a business issue that leaders have to manage deliberately, not just a problem for the technology team to clean up after the fact. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our Course Companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good place to begin is by separating the ideas of risk event and impact, because they are related but not the same. A risk event is the thing that happens or might happen, such as a ransomware infection, a system outage, a cloud service disruption, a data leak, a failed software change, or a misconfigured identity platform. Impact is the consequence that follows from that event, such as lost revenue, missed service commitments, damaged trust, delayed operations, regulatory attention, or inability to access critical information. Beginners sometimes focus too heavily on the event itself because it sounds more dramatic and concrete, but good risk analysis pays close attention to what the event means for the organization. Two companies may experience the same technical event and suffer very different impacts depending on the kind of business they run, how prepared they are, what data is involved, and how dependent they are on the affected system. That is why impact analysis always has to be grounded in business context rather than treated as a generic label attached to a technical problem. It is also important to understand the difference between potential impact and realized impact. Potential impact refers to the harm that could happen if a risk event occurs, even if it has not happened yet. Realized impact refers to the harm that actually did happen after the event took place. This distinction matters because organizations need both forward-looking and backward-looking thinking. Potential impact helps leaders decide where to invest, which controls to strengthen, which risks deserve more attention, and how much disruption or loss the organization can realistically tolerate. Realized impact helps the organization understand what an event truly cost, where assumptions were wrong, how controls performed in practice, and what should change after the incident. A mature risk program uses both views together. It estimates possible consequences before an event and then learns from actual consequences afterward, so the organization becomes better at judging future exposure instead of continuing to rely on outdated assumptions or optimistic guesses. One of the most useful beginner lessons is that impact takes many forms, and not all of them are immediately visible in a financial report. Financial impact is often the easiest to picture because people can imagine lost sales, response costs, legal expenses, contract penalties, fraud losses, or the cost of rebuilding systems and restoring data. But impact also includes operational disruption, such as delayed processing, missed deadlines, reduced productivity, service interruptions, or inability to complete essential business functions. It may include reputational harm if customers, regulators, partners, or the public lose confidence in the organization's ability to protect information or provide reliable service. It may include legal or regulatory consequences if obligations were not met or protected data was mishandled. In some industries, it may also include safety consequences if technology failure affects medical treatment, industrial systems, transportation, or emergency operations. The key point is that impact is broader than money, and strong risk work recognizes the full range of harm rather than focusing only on the most easily measured category. Operational impact is especially important because many IT risk events hurt the business first by interrupting normal work rather than by creating an obvious public crisis. A system outage may prevent customer service teams from accessing records, stop payroll processing, delay manufacturing schedules, interrupt healthcare workflows, or block students and faculty from using learning platforms. A problem does not need to make national headlines to be highly damaging. It may simply create enough delay, confusion, or process failure that the organization cannot meet its commitments or function at an acceptable level. For beginners, this is a useful correction because risk impact is often quieter and more practical than dramatic media stories suggest. A failure that stops a small but critical internal process may hurt the organization more than a larger visible issue that affects a non-essential tool. That is why identifying impact requires understanding which processes matter most, how much interruption they can tolerate, and what dependencies sit behind them. Data-related impact brings another layer of complexity because harm can result not only from losing access to data, but also from exposing it or corrupting it. If confidential data is disclosed, the organization may face privacy concerns, reputational damage, customer distrust, or legal and regulatory pressure. If data integrity is damaged, the organization may make bad decisions based on inaccurate records, incorrect transactions, altered reports, or flawed operational inputs. If availability is lost, users may be unable to complete essential work even if the data itself still exists somewhere in backup form. These distinctions matter because different IT risk events may affect confidentiality, integrity, and availability (CIA) in different ways, and the impact will reflect whichever element is most disrupted. A data integrity issue in a financial reporting process may be more harmful than a short outage in a low-priority collaboration tool. A privacy breach involving employee or customer records may create more long-term harm than a visible but temporary performance slowdown. Identifying impact means asking not just whether data was affected, but how it was affected and what business consequences follow from that specific kind of damage. Another essential idea is that impact can be direct or indirect. Direct impact includes the immediate results of an event, such as system downtime, data loss, incident response expense, missed transactions, or halted operations. Indirect impact includes the second-order effects that unfold later, such as customer churn, strained vendor relationships, employee fatigue, audit findings, increased insurance costs, delayed projects, or reputational damage that affects future growth. Beginners often underestimate indirect impact because it is harder to see and may not appear right away. A service outage might be fixed in hours, but the organization may spend months repairing trust, addressing complaints, improving controls, or managing the fallout from rushed manual workarounds that were used during the disruption. This is one reason impact identification requires broader thinking than simply measuring the immediate technical problem. The true cost of an IT risk event often extends beyond the incident window and reaches into future operations, leadership confidence, regulatory attention, and strategic flexibility. Time also matters greatly when identifying impact, because the severity of harm often changes depending on how long the problem lasts and when it occurs. A short disruption during a low-demand period may be inconvenient but manageable, while the same disruption during payroll processing, month-end close, major customer demand, or a peak sales event may become much more serious. Some impacts appear almost immediately, while others grow slowly as the event continues. A database issue might cause minimal concern after 10 minutes, but become a major crisis after several hours if critical business functions remain unavailable. This means organizations should think about impact as something that can escalate over time rather than as a fixed number assigned once. A strong risk professional asks how fast the consequences grow, when thresholds are crossed, and which business activities become unacceptable first. Understanding the time dimension helps the organization prioritize response, assign recovery targets more realistically, and avoid the mistake of assuming that all downtime or data loss carries the same meaning regardless of timing and duration. Business context is what makes impact analysis meaningful, because the same technical issue can have very different consequences in different organizations or even in different parts of the same organization. An outage in a public-facing customer portal may be highly disruptive for a digital business that depends on constant online access, while the same kind of outage in a non-critical internal application may be far less serious. A confidentiality issue involving public marketing content is very different from one involving health records, payment information, or merger plans. Even within one organization, systems that look similar on a diagram may support very different levels of business importance. That is why risk professionals gather business and IT information before trying to judge impact. They need to understand critical processes, service commitments, regulatory obligations, customer expectations, dependencies, and tolerance for interruption. Without that context, impact identification becomes generic and unhelpful. With it, the organization can begin to distinguish between issues that are annoying, issues that are serious, and issues that threaten essential operations or long-term trust. Scenario thinking is one of the best ways to identify potential impact because it forces people to move beyond vague concern and think in concrete terms about what could happen next. Instead of saying a system is important, a useful scenario asks what would happen if that system were unavailable for 1 hour, 1 day, or 3 days. Instead of merely noting that a database contains sensitive information, a good scenario asks what would happen if unauthorized parties accessed it, if key records were altered, or if the data became unavailable during a critical business period. These scenarios help reveal impact across operations, revenue, customer service, legal obligations, and reputation. They also make it easier for technical teams and business leaders to have a shared conversation, because the discussion becomes focused on consequences rather than on abstract technical warnings. For beginners, this is especially valuable because scenarios build practical judgment. They help translate complicated environments into understandable possibilities and expose where the organization has weak assumptions, hidden dependencies, or poor understanding of what a disruption would actually mean. Realized impact deserves special attention because organizations often learn the most after an actual event has occurred. Once a system failure, breach, or control breakdown happens, the organization can observe which business services were interrupted, how long the disruption lasted, which stakeholders were affected, what the financial and operational costs were, and where response plans were strong or weak. Realized impact also shows whether the organization's earlier potential impact estimates were realistic. Sometimes leaders discover that an event caused less harm than expected because controls, workarounds, or alternate processes worked well. In other cases, they discover that the harm was much greater than predicted because dependencies were poorly understood or assumptions were overly optimistic. This learning matters because future risk assessments should reflect what actually happened, not just what was imagined on paper. A mature organization uses realized impact information to improve risk scenarios, refine business impact analysis, strengthen recovery planning, and guide future investment toward the areas where evidence shows exposure is greater than previously understood. It is also important to identify who is affected by an IT risk event because impact rarely falls on only one group. Customers may lose access to services, experience delays, or worry about their information. Employees may lose productivity, face stress, or be forced into manual workarounds that increase the chance of errors. Executives may face decision pressure, reporting obligations, or public scrutiny. Regulators, partners, vendors, and auditors may all become involved depending on the nature of the event. In some cases, shareholders, patients, students, or citizens may also be affected if the organization provides public or essential services. Seeing impact through a stakeholder lens helps prevent overly narrow analysis. A problem that appears minor from a technical operations standpoint may be significant when viewed through the experience of customers or the obligations of leadership. For CRISC learners, this is a strong reminder that impact is not only about systems and processes. It is also about people, trust, responsibility, and the wider network of relationships that surround the organization. Common misconceptions can distort impact identification if they are not corrected. One misconception is that only large dramatic incidents have meaningful impact, when in fact repeated smaller failures can create substantial business harm over time through delay, rework, customer frustration, and control fatigue. Another is that impact should be measured only in money, even though legal, operational, reputational, and safety consequences may be just as important and sometimes harder to reverse. There is also a tendency to treat impact as obvious, when in reality it often requires careful investigation, stakeholder input, and scenario thinking to understand fully. Some organizations focus on the visible technical failure and miss the cascading effects on reporting, vendor management, employee workload, or long-term trust. Others assume that if a system is restored quickly, the impact is over, even though the downstream consequences may continue for weeks or months. These misconceptions matter because shallow impact analysis leads to shallow risk prioritization, and shallow prioritization leaves the organization exposed where it most needs clear judgment. A simple example helps make this topic practical. Imagine a company experiences a failure in the system that supports customer order processing. The technical event may seem at first like an application outage, but the impacts can spread quickly. New orders may stop, existing orders may not update correctly, customer support may lack visibility into status, finance may not receive accurate transaction data, and operations teams may begin using manual workarounds that create errors and delays. If the outage lasts long enough, customers may lose confidence, contractual deadlines may be missed, and leadership may face pressure from both internal teams and outside stakeholders. If the event happened during a peak business period, the impact would likely be worse than if it happened during a quiet interval. This example shows why impact identification is not about naming the broken system and stopping there. It is about understanding how that failure affects business processes, people, timing, trust, and the organization's ability to continue functioning acceptably. When you pull all of these ideas together, identifying potential or realized impacts of IT risk becomes one of the clearest ways to connect technical events to business meaning. Potential impact helps the organization anticipate harm before an event occurs, while realized impact helps it learn from actual experience after the event has happened. Strong impact analysis considers financial, operational, reputational, legal, privacy, and sometimes safety consequences, along with time, stakeholders, and hidden secondary effects. For a new learner, the biggest takeaway is that risk is not truly understood until its consequences are understood. A threat, vulnerability, or failed control may sound important, but its real significance becomes clear only when you can explain what it could do or what it already did to the business. Once that becomes your habit of thinking, risk analysis becomes much more useful because you are no longer just identifying problems. You are identifying why those problems matter and how seriously the organization should take them.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.